exciting stuff.
Yes.
Yes. So, very, we usually have, if you guys continue to come, I will tell you, within a couple of weeks, all of this will be packed, and you'll have to fight for a place to sit.
Set up more tables.
Huh?
Set up more tables.
Yeah. But let's go ahead and begin. Larry, would you mind leading us in prayer?
Our dearest Heavenly Father, we come before Thee wanting and eagerly wanting to study Your Word. We ask Thee that You would help the sick and afflicted in this country, especially our young men and women that are in harm's way. Bring them back to us. Help us to be better Christians. In Christ's holy name we do pray. Amen.
And Todd, do you mind if when we go to close, if I have you do the closing prayer, are you okay with that? Okay. So, Job chapter 31 is where we're at. And Job's in the middle of his discourse about how he's an alright guy. And we're going to go through today and we're going to discover some things. We're going to go through today and we're going to discover some things. What you've probably heard about the book of Job is that Job is, and God says it, right, from the perspective of heaven in Job chapter 1. He says, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him. He's blameless and upright, a man who shuns evil and fears God. And so, I don't think you can walk away from the book of Job and say, oh, Job is not that, right? You have to see, of course, that God is right when He makes that declaration of Job. And even by the end of Job, I think that is still true. However, there's also going to be some things pointed out about some flaws with Job as well. And one of the things that I often hear is that, well, Job is, people paint Job sometimes as though he never makes a mistake. And that isn't the case. I do think that when Job makes a mistake, and we've talked about through the class, that when Job finds himself getting over brash in his, the way he talks about God, then he'll walk it back. And he'll say, that's not really what I mean to say. What I mean is, and he'll kind of come off with a lot calmer thing. But he kind of starts getting aggravated and says some hot-headed stuff and then dials it back. And I think that is a good thing for us to be able to do if we catch ourselves being hot-headed. So, Job 31, Job says, I've made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? And some translations will say, I've made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman. Right? And I was in Oregon at the church there, and one time, you put stuff on the marquee. And probably the biggest reaction I got from the community was I put Job 31:1 on the marquee, and then I just put the word pornography. And it's interesting, if you put the word pornography on a church marquee, people will start calling you. And they said, what is this about? What are you talking about? And I asked everybody that called, I said, have you read the verse? And they said, no. So you looked at the phone number, but you haven't read the verse. Try reading the verse, and then if you still feel the need to call, go ahead and call back, and be upset about it. But, yeah, I don't know. But I do like this, I appreciate this concept where the Bible says that Job makes a covenant with his eyes, not to look lustfully at a woman, right? And I don't know how you guys play out, but I will say the day before I was a married guy, I shouldn't say the day before I was a married guy, back before when I was single, does a single guy look at gals? He's trying to find the right one, right? So part of finding the right one is looking at a bunch to see which one is the right one, right? Don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying. But the point is this. When I got married, I remember, so driving down the road as a single guy, I would drive down the road, if there was a pretty girl in the car next to me, guess what my head would do? I had pretty girl sonar. My wife was looking at giving me looks like, you better be careful. But that's how I found her, my pretty girl sonar. In fact, I will tell you this, the first day I met her, I still remember that, and I walked into a Denny's and she was sitting there, and there was a bunch of people there introducing me to, and my eyes caught her, and I thought, I can't breathe. I gotta look at the next person before she realizes that I'm staring at her, and I had to consciously walk my mind through, look at the next person, you idiot, right? So, but when my wife and I first got married, I'd drive down the road, and I had gone from being a single guy, looking at gals and not standing in the grocery, but being a single guy. And then I look at gals, and I decided, I remember this passage from Job, and I decided I'm going to make a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a woman. And so if I caught myself notice that a girl was pretty, I would specifically not look that direction again. And I think David would have done himself some good right? When he was up and he noticed Bathsheba, I don't think there's anything wrong with noticing that she was pretty. I do think there's something wrong with lingering on that noticing. Then you're really playing into a bad hand there. But Job speaks against lust and against pornography, depending on what translation you have. He speaks against lust and he speaks against pornography. For those who think that the Bible doesn't address the stuff that, oh, but this is a new invention of sin. No, it's not a new invention of sin. Verse 4, Job says, does not he see, concerning God, he says, does not God see my ways and number all my steps? And Job points out rightfully that God sees everything we do. Right? Verse 5 and 6, if I have walked with falsehood and my foot has hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance and let God know my integrity. So Job is pointing out, if I've been a bad guy, God knows about it. He can put me on the scales and weigh me. And Job is pointing out that his priority is his integrity. His priority is his integrity. Verse 7 and 8. If my step is turned aside from the way and my heart has gone after my eyes, and if any spot has stuck to my hands, then let me sow and another eat. Let what grows from me be rooted out. And the idea is, if I've been dishonest, then let my effort and my work, let somebody else gain and reap the effort of my hands, the work of my hands. So we find that he speaks against dishonesty, right? He says in verse 9, if my heart has been enticed toward a woman, and if I have laid in wait at my neighbor's door. Why would somebody be waiting at the neighbor's door? For the husband to leave. Right? So he's saying, if my heart has been enticed toward a woman and I've laid in wait at my neighbor's door, and then if I look, he says, then let my wife grind for another. And this isn't a sexual term. He's talking about let my wife go and be the helper of somebody else. Let her grind wheat for somebody else. Let her be somebody else's helper. Right? Then let my wife grind for another, and let others, and this second phrase here is actually a sexual term, but it's a bad thing. For that would be a heinous crime, right? And so he points out that adultery is what kind of a crime? Heinous, right? So he speaks against adultery, right? If I have rejected the cause of my manservant or my maidservant, when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what shall I answer him? Did not the one who made me in the womb make him? So who does Job say God made? Made him and also his servants. Notice Job is equalizing himself. He's saying God has made the master and he's made the servants. So how can the master then abuse the servants? Right? So Job is speaking out against abuse of authority. Also, too, if you want a reference verse for that as well, James chapter 3, verses 8 to 10 speaks against that. It says, with one mouth we bless God when we curse men and men are made in the image and likeness of God. And he says, brothers, this what? Shouldn't be the case that we would talk trash, bless God with our mouth and then curse men who are made in his image and likeness. Doesn't make any sense, right? And of course, Job here is pointing out that both him and his servants were both made by God. Verse 16, if I have withheld anything that the poor desired. Can someone turn on the air conditioner? I feel like the AC's not on. It feels a little hot to me, since I am in a coat. If I have withheld anything that the poor desired, or if I have caused the eyes of the widow to fail. By the way, you guys remember it's interesting how much Job understands of the book of James. Just in his nature, and the book of James has not been written yet. Right? But he really understands, he's got the same spirit and same heart as the book of James. He says, if I've withheld anything from the poor, that the poor desire, if I've caused the eyes of the widow to fail. And the book of James says, I think it's 127, it says, true religion is this, to take care of widows and orphans and to keep yourself from being corrupted by the world. Right? He says, or if I have eaten any morsel alone, what does that mean? Is it a sin to eat by yourself? To go sit at the table and eat by yourself? He said, I hope not.
I hope, I do it all the time.
Right? So when he says, if I have eaten any morsel alone and the fatherless have not eaten of it, what's he saying?
That's God's blessing.
Well, and I'll approach you too. Maybe he's saying that he's hospitable. He shares his food with others. Right? When he says, have I eaten, it's not saying he's a sin to eat alone. But if he sees somebody else, what does he do? He says, hey, come and eat. Right? He says, for from my youth the fatherless grew up with me as a father. By the way, what's another name for fatherless? In James 1:27, orphan. Good job. An orphan, right? It says, for from my youth the fatherless grew up with me as a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the widow. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or the needy without covering, if his body has not blessed me, and if he was not warmed by the fleece of my sheep. So he's saying, if you see somebody that doesn't have clothes, what does he do? He gives them clothes. If I have raised my hand against the fatherless because I saw my help in the gate, then let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder and let my arm be broken from its socket. And it's funny because I actually have chronic dislocated shoulders. So I can understand this. This passage, he says, if I haven't helped people, if I've watched people go without clothes or without food and just ignored them and not cared, then let my shoulder blades just fall from their socket. And I'll say it's an annoying thing to have happen. I will split you guys up and have you move if you guys keep up. Okay? Thank you. So, Job speaks against disconcern for his fellow man. He speaks against disconcern for his fellow man. Should you care when you see your fellow man in trouble? By the way, what happened at 9/11?
Everybody helped us hard.
And nobody asked anybody any questions about qualifying for help. You notice if things get bad enough, people will actually turn righteous-ish. Nobody said, are you homosexual? Are you heterosexual? Are you black? Are you white? Are you American? Are you here illegally? There are universal things that you should treat people with. Human beings should be treated with dignity, period. Right? At the same time, there's laws of land that you ought to respect as well. There's a balance of those things. None of that stuff gives anybody the right to treat human dignity as though it has no regard. Right? So, Job is saying, whatever the scenario is, I've taken care of those who are around me. Verse 24. If I have made gold my trust, or called for gold, or called fine gold my confidence, what would that be? Some agree, right? Job is listing out conditions by which he should be condemned. You see what I'm saying? That's why he starts all these with questions, right? With if. If you just look down at the beginning, how many of these, right off the bat, the majority of these, right, have the word if at the beginning of them, right? He's saying, if I've done this, then I accept my condemnation. He says, if I've made gold my trust, or called fine gold my confidence, if I've rejoiced because my wealth was abundant, or because my hand found much. He's talking about greed, right? So Job speaks against greed. He says, if I've looked at the sun, where it shone, or the moon moving in its splendor, and my heart had secretly been enticed, and my mouth had kissed my hand. Just think about the comedy of this for a second, by the way. And although the events happened afterwards, well, you guys may not know, did you know that the Pharaoh of Egypt, this happens before you get the Egyptian issues that they're going to have to go through. This is just later on in the book, but the events occur before, back in the time of Abraham, not in the time of Moses, right? But the Pharaoh, one of the things of Pharaoh is Pharaoh would worship the sun, and Pharaoh himself was supposed to be physically the sun god on earth. He's supposed to be a deity on earth. And so it's interesting, that's where this concept comes from. He says, if I've looked at the sun where it shone, and the moon moving with splendor, and my heart had been secretly enticed, and my mouth would have kissed my hand. What's he saying? What kind of people have to kiss somebody's hand? Or I should say, whose hand gets kissed? The king's, right? So he's saying, if I looked at the sun and the moon and I thought, you know what? I am amazing. I'm like them. I am a god. I'm going to kiss my own hand and worship who? Worship myself. Right? So he speaks against greed and self-worship. That's your number 8. He speaks against greed and self-worship. And he says, this also would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges, for I would have been false to God above. Verse 29, if I rejoiced at the ruin of him who hated me, or exalted when evil overtook him, I have not let my mouth sin by asking for his life with a curse. So he speaks against revenge. Does anybody ever have any revenge issues? Anybody ever been treated poorly? We talked about this Sunday, right? You know, by the way, I couldn't tell you how many people came up to me after church on Sunday and said, I have some stuff that is going on in my life right now that is enticing me to be excited about the whole revenge and bitterness and anger and frustration.
Amen.
And some people be saying amen. Right now, giving themselves away. So, right?
I don't need to give myself away. It's pretty evident.
Right. So, but I'm just saying, notice, one of the things that happens when somebody treats us poorly, part of us goes to turn and walk away and we think, you'll get yours.
Yeah.
Notice what Job says. Job says, I have not let my mouth sin by asking for his life with a curse. So I will tell you, you shouldn't walk away from somebody. Now, and I'm not saying this is easy in any way. I'm telling you, somebody who is right now struggling with it as well. It's tough, but you shouldn't walk away from somebody and say, you know what, you'll get what you deserve. What does each of us deserve? Right. And this is an interesting thing because, by the way, this phrase of, we use it in 2 ways. We say, I hope you get what you deserve. And then we do this thing where like, I didn't get what I deserved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the real comedy in this is, when we say about other people, do we mean it in a positive or a negative?
Negative.
When we say about ourselves, we mean it in a positive or a negative? I will tell you, it's the exact same statement and the exact same outcome is in store. So don't be calling for other people to get what they deserve. And by the way, stop asking to get what you deserve. Because you don't deserve it. Whatever you've got is a gift from God. And I mean, isn't that the nature of Job? Job says, the Lord gives, the Lord can take away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Right? So amen. But he says, yeah, if I've rejoiced in the ruin of him who hated me, or exalted over him let's just throw out a hypothetical scenario. Say you've got an easement on your property or something, and the guy who's using your easement and trying to steal your property is coming up and down this easement, and he hits a pothole and gets a flat tire. How do you feel? You're kind of like, yeah, you might give a little giggle out, almost back. I'll tell you what you should do is go help him fix his tire. Right? I mean, huh? Amen. Amen. And I hope that doesn't hit too close to home for anybody.
Well, he didn't have a flat tire.
Right.
So I was okay still.
By the way, guess who shouldn't put the nails in the road to produce this scenario? Right. Yeah. Amen.
Well, he had solid rubber tires on the golf cart, so I'd say.
Larry's like, I'm not coming to this class anymore.
No.
All right. Verse 31. Let's leave Larry alone.
You reap what you sow.
Yeah. So verse 31. If the men in my tent have not said, who is there that has not been filled with this meat? The sojourner has not lodged in the street. I have opened my doors to the traveler. Consider this, and we like to take scripture and act like it's irrelevant. I am very much for strong borders. I'm sure anybody who's heard me speak on the matter has heard me be very clear that I'm for strong borders. I will say, what is a sojourner? Do you guys know what a sojourner is?
Traveling person.
Someone who's passing through. And I will tell you the truth about the vast majority of illegal immigrants. Their intent is not to stay here. Now, their intent might be to be here and get what they can and then take it somewhere else. And there's a problem with that, morally, right? But there's also a problem with, on a racial level, just picking somebody and being abusive to them, or just saying, because you're Hispanic, there's a problem with you, or because even if you were to say, because you're here illegally, I will treat you lousy, is not right. Even those who are here illegally, they should obey the law, and we should enforce the laws. At the same time, we should treat them well. If somebody's here illegally, doesn't mean we should ignore them if they're dying from thirst, right? Doesn't mean we should be abusive to them or beat them up or steal their clothes, or we can just treat them lousily. At the same time, we also have a right and a responsibility to enforce our laws, right? So there is a balance of those things. Sometimes people can get so zealous for one side of it that they neglect or be rude or hostile to the other side of it, you know. And there needs to be balance in that whole line of reasoning. So Job speaks against revenge. Job also speaks against racism or poor treatment of sojourners. And like I say, any illegal immigrant is here as a sojourner, right? That doesn't mean you need to give them the right to vote or a bunch of stuff. But as far as, you know, preserving their life, you shouldn't kill them either. You know, you shouldn't abuse them. And by the way, you want to talk about abusive. An abusive relationship is when farmers go out and they specifically seek that group of people so that they can exploit the wages. Farmers ought to be paying, if they're going to pay a sojourner, they have to pay them comparable wages. It shouldn't change if we had illegal immigrants doing farm work or natural citizens doing farm work. Should not change the price paid for farm work.
It is.
Right. And it's interesting because people say, well, then, you know, the people that own the farms, well, those actually care more about the illegal immigrant. No, they don't. They care that they're here so they can exploit them, you know, but they shouldn't be exploited. So, verse 33. If I have concealed my transgressions as others do, by hiding my iniquity in my heart, because I stood in great fear of the multitude, and the contempt of families terrified me, so that I kept silent and did not go out of doors. He's talking about having a secret life, about doing wicked things, and so you don't go out doors, you don't let anybody know anything about you, you don't get involved with anybody else, because secretly you've got a wicked life, and you know nobody would love you, nobody would care for you, and people would treat you lousy if they knew what kind of filthy thing you were. I want to point out, Job is speaking against having a secret life. Job's speaking against having a secret life. You ought to live in such a way that there's nothing to be kept secret in your life. I think few people do that in reality, but that ought to be how you live. Then in verse 38, if my land cries out against me, and its furrows have wept together, if I have eaten its yield without payment, and made its owners breathe their last. And so he talks about the concept of legal theft. Is it possible to have legal theft?
Yes.
Let's say you've got a property with an easement on it.
Here we go.
It is Arizona State.
Right. I just want to point out, notice, Larry, we fall on both sides of it. They have a responsibility, the person who's thieving has a responsibility to not be doing that.
Yeah.
And you also have the responsibility not to have a vengeful nature about you if they're doing that. Now, you should protect your property and do what you can to preserve your rights, but that doesn't mean you go put nails out in the driveway and hope he drives over them and
Oh, no, just dynamite the road.
just dynamite the road.
She did.
I said, oh, no.
Let's not talk about that. This is being recorded. It may be counted as a confession. So, verse 32, chapter 32. Right? So yeah, Job does speak against legal theft, right? Elihu, my favorite guy in the whole book, apart from God. My favorite guy in the entire book. Elihu is not, there's no indication that Elihu even exists until you get to chapter 32. And Elihu's just this guy who's hanging out. And it appears to be that he is a student of Job. That he's a younger guy and he sits and he learns from Job. And so he just sits beside and shuts up and watches what goes on. By the way, it goes to testify to another thing. Just this entire time up through 31, do you get a picture of Job being alone? Right.
Right.
Yeah. Nobody cares for him is what you would get from Job's perspective. But guess who's there? Elihu. What is Elihu doing there? And he's been there this whole time and heard all this argument.
Sitting on the sides is observing.
Is it possible sometimes we feel more alone than we actually are? Absolutely. So,
What version are you?
I'm the,
ESV.
yeah, ESV.
I'm using the New Living Translation.
Okay.
And some of the words are the same, but they're vastly different. In other words, he came out of the closet.
Who's that?
Job.
Okay,
the way it's, anyway. Sorry.
I don't know, I just work here.
It says hiding my guilt in a closet,
Right,
so.
right. Yeah, that's the whole idea of having a secret life, right? Same concept, yeah. And by the way, he isn't advocating that we come out of the closet and be sinful out in the broad open. What he's saying is, leave sin behind. Right? Live a life that doesn't have to have hidden things in it. Chapter 32, verse 2. Then Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite, of the family of Ram, burned with anger. He burned with anger at Job. That's interesting. Yeah, oh, she says, hers says with Job. She burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. He burned with anger at Job's three friends because they had found no answer, although they had declared Job to be in the wrong. So here's the deal. Two things that should bother you. Elihu says it should bother you when people say they are righteous rather than God. And if you look at the core of Job's argument as he goes through, Job's argument as he goes through is, I am righteous, and there is a constant tone of, but God's not treating me fairly. Do you notice that as we went through the book of Job? I'm righteous, but God's not treating me fairly. What is that suggesting? It's not suggesting only that I'm righteous, but maybe there is an unrighteousness about God. Do you see the insinuation? Does God treat people fairly and right and good and just?
Yes.
Absolutely. Right? So that's the problem that he has with Job's comments. And the problem he has with the friends is because they're making accusations, but they don't have any proof. So Elihu says it should bother you when people make accusations without proof. Don't let baseless accusations convince you one way or another of anything. And then he says in verse 4, Elihu had waited to speak because they were older than he. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in their mouth of these three men, he burned with anger, and Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, answered and said, and he's going to go on and answer. But I just want to point out an interesting thing. Elihu understands parliamentary procedure. He understands parliamentary procedure. And this is the whole concept that there is order. When people are having a discussion or debate, that there's order that goes with it. It's not just an anarchy, free-for-all, shout, whoever shouts loudest wins. So you notice he waits to the end. Why does he wait to the end?
He was young.
Because he's young, and all these other people are supposed to have wisdom. And we should do that. If you happen to be young, and you see, well, kids, I guess all I'm talking to is you guys. Everybody else here is old. But if you guys are sitting in the car and your mom and dad are arguing, and you think of a great point, what should you do?
Be quiet.
Amen! You're wise. Right? Yeah, you don't go to correcting your parents. Why don't kids go to correcting their parents like that? I mean, they might, but then it doesn't work out well.
No.
Right? Because there is such a thing as parliamentary procedure, and when two adults are having a conversation about a thing, don't throw in like you know what's going on. And if you're gonna, wait until what? Wait until they're finished. Right? So yeah, it's interesting that way back here, Elihu has got a concept of parliamentary procedure, right?
Yeah, but I think he has the alternative motive. Here's what it says in this scripture, it says insisting on his innocence. And then again, he says that for wisdom comes with age.
Right.
Okay,
He wants to see their wise argument play out. Right. Absolutely. And he says, I am young in years, and you are aged, therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. Which is valid. That's totally the right godly response. You have to. I'm not saying, by the way, notice too, he doesn't permanently stay quiet, does he? At some point, he does speak up, but he lets the older, wiser people deal with it first until they can't figure it out. And he's like, guys, are you kidding me? It's not complicated. By the way, 1 Timothy 4:12 says, do not let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for them in faith and word and deed. Right? Being young doesn't just make you stupid. Now, there's some young people that are stupid, aren't there? And there's some old people that are stupid, right? And I'll point out, Elihu's going to point out that the age thing isn't really the defining factor. He will point out what it is, though. Verse 7. I said, let days speak, and many years teach wisdom. That is, let the older people do their thing. But it is the Spirit in man, the breath of the Almighty, that makes him understand. It is not the old who are wise, nor the aged who understand what is right. Therefore I say, listen to me. Let me also declare my opinion. And you may have missed it, but what he pointed out was that wisdom comes from the Holy Spirit. You don't just get wisdom for being old. There's some old people who have been sheltered their whole stinking life. Right? But he points out, he says, let days speak, let many years teach wisdom, but it is what? The Spirit in man. What Spirit? Okay? The breath of
The Almighty.
the Almighty. What would you call that Spirit?
The Holy Spirit.
That's the Holy Spirit. Right? The breath of the Almighty that makes him understand. Verse 14. This is Elihu speaking about the accusations of the three friends and of Job. And he says and he's talking about Job, he has not directed his words against me, and I will not answer him with your speeches. So what's he saying? I will not resort to either Job or the friend's arguments. Both Job's argument and the friend's argument are not great. The friend's is really bad. Job's is at least okay, but not good. Needs some improvement, right? So, yeah, he's not going to resort to either of those arguments. Verse 21. I will not show partiality to any man or use flattery toward any person, for I do not know how to flatter. Else my Maker would soon take me away. So Elihu is saying, I will be objective. I'm not going to do favors for anybody. Chapter 33. Elihu says, behold, I am toward God as you are. That is, we're both facing God, right? We're both having to deal with God. He says, I too was pinched from a piece of clay. What's he mean I too was pinched from a piece of clay? What's that? From the mouths of babes. Speak up, guardian. He was made. He says, I too was pinched from a piece of clay. He's saying he was created. Elihu was like, I'm a created being. Job, you are a created being. We are all on the same playing field. Behold, no fear of me needs to terrify you. My pressure will not be heavy on you. What does this mean too, by the way? It goes to show us we don't have to fear man. Man is clay. There's nothing to be feared. Right? If you walked into a house and you saw a piece of clay on your dining room table, inasmuch as nobody broke into your house and put it there, but I'm saying, the fact that clay is sitting on your dining room table, would that scare you?
It would be of interest.
So, if you left the house and there was clay on your dining room table and you came home and there's clay on your dining room table, would you be afraid?
No.
No. Because why? It's clay. Who cares? And so what we find out is that we are all, you need what? We are all clay. We're all clay. I thought you'd be so excited. Yeah. I get it. Clay. Clay Warrington, right? We're all clay. Yeah. Anyways. Verse 8. It's a next one night's joke. You wouldn't get it. If you're not a kid this age, you wouldn't get it. Right. Well, you're a kid that age. So, yeah. All right. Verse 8. Surely you have spoken in my ears. I have heard the sound of your words. You say, I am pure without transgression. I am clean and there is no iniquity in me. Behold, he finds occasion against me. So Job is saying about God, God finds occasion against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in stocks and watches all my paths. So Job is saying, I haven't done anything wrong, but God's just out to get me. I want to point out, Elihu points this out because this is the element in which Job is wrong. Job is generally right in the things he says through the book of Job. But this is the part of the stuff that Job says that's messed up. God is not out to just torture people. He doesn't do that. And verse 12, in case you're confused, he follows up with, behold, you are what? Not right. Just in case you were thinking that Job is still right. Now it's all clear up for you. Okay? I will answer you, Elihu says. For God is greater than man. Why do you contend against him, saying, he will answer none of man's words? For God speaks in one way, and in two, though man does not perceive it. I want to point out, Job's argument is, God doesn't answer us. What's Elihu's argument? Amen. That ought to be encouraging to you. God does, in fact, answer mankind. Look at verse 15. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on men while they slumber in their beds, then he opens the ears of men and terrifies them with warnings. And so we discover that God does speak through dreams. That being said, don't have a dream and think, I've got this figured out. Part of God speaking through dreams requires you to be able to perceive it. And go back to verse 14. It says, for God speaks in one way, and in two, though man does what? It is not perceived. So even if you have a dream and you think, I got this figured out, be careful, because the dream in itself doesn't mean that you nailed it. What the Bible says is that God speaks, but man doesn't do a good job of what?
Understand.
Of perceiving it, right? But God does answer, we just don't really get it. So,
Here's a testimony to that.
okay,
Because every night when I lay my head on the pillow, before I fall asleep, I ask God for dreams and visions and interpretation, and I thank Him for it. But I wake up, if I don't remember the dream, I know I dream almost all night long, it feels like.
right?
And I don't, if I do remember a tidbit, I don't know, I can't interpret it. So
Amen.
I don't feel like I'm to have that done yet. I don't know why.
Right. Yeah, it's a challenge. It's trying to make sense of what God is doing, especially in dreams, because a lot of things are wild in dreams because they're not bound by reality, right? Is God speaking? I think the Bible would say yes, but do we understand it? I think the Bible would say no, right? And so with communication, there is what needs to happen between two people communicating. One person needs to speak and the other person needs to hear, and it needs to be understood by both parties for it to be a quality communication, right? And that's the struggle we have, is trying to understand God and understand what He tries to tell us. But He does speak through dreams, and I will say, as a guy who's not superstitious, I'm a little stitious, but I'm just not superstitious, you know. So, as a guy who's not superstitious, this to me was a challenge to me, because I'm like, this is tough. How do I resolve this? You know. So, it is a challenge because you do have to figure out how to perceive it. Verse 19. Man is also rebuked with what? Pain on his bed and with continual strife in his bones, so that his life loathes bread and his appetite the choicest food. What's that describing?
Arthritis.
Old age.
Old age. Health issues. For some of you might be challenged by this. The Bible is essentially saying God speaks to us through health issues. And this isn't a complicated thought. If you think about, I think it's Romans chapter 1, verses 16 through the end of it. I think that's the passage where it talks about how people who give up natural relations for unnatural relations suffer within themselves physical problems. Right? Talking about diseases, STDs and stuff, right? Does God speak through illness? Yeah. Do we listen? We don't usually listen. We usually want to go talk to the doctor.
She goes to the doctor first, Jesus first.
Right, we go to the doctor first, and Jesus might come down the list somewhere, and oftentimes we may completely ignore him and think God's not saying nothing. But God speaks through dreams, He speaks through health issues. Verse 23. If there be for him an angel, a mediator, 1 in 1,000, to declare to man what is right for him, and is merciful to him, and says, deliver him from going down into the pit, I have found a ransom, let his flesh become fresh with youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor, and then man prays, and he prays to God, and He accepts him. He sees his face with a shout of joy, and He restores the man his righteousness. He sings before men, and says, I have sinned and perverted what was right. And what we find is, I don't know if you noticed, the whole first half of that was talking about what incident in history? There be for him an angel, a mediator, 1 of the 1,000, To declare to man, and by the way, I should mention, the word angel in Hebrew just means messenger. So don't see the word angel and assume it's talking about what we traditionally define as an angel. An angel just means messenger, and a person can be a messenger, and Jesus can be a messenger, and the Holy Spirit can be a messenger, and even God himself, and angels can be messengers.
But it says that the angels the angels of death. So in other words, the messenger of death waits for them.
Well, I don't see anything about the thing of death on that part.
That's verse 22.
Oh, sorry, I started verse 23.
Yes, I know, I looked at that and said, okay.
So 22 in mine reads, his soul draws near to the pit, and his life to those who bring death.
He destroyed.
Yeah, so I can see that. So yours says messengers of death, interesting. If there be for him a angel or messenger, and I would lean to the messenger side, because he says, he redefines that as a what? Mediator. Who is the mediator? Jesus, right? A mediator, one of the 1,000, to declare to a man what is right for him. What has Jesus done?
Died for us.
He's declared what's right for us, right? And he is merciful to him. Has Jesus done that? And says, deliver him from going down to the pit. Has Jesus done that?
Yes.
I have found a ransom. Has Jesus done that? Right? Let his flesh become fresh with youth. Let him return to the days of his youthful vigor. Then man prays to God and he accepts him. So notice, after interacting with the mediator, what does God do? He accepts him. Has Jesus done that? Right? He sees his face with a shout of joy and restores man to his righteousness. Has Jesus restored us to righteousness?
Yes.
Right? He sings before me and says, I sinned and perverted what was right, and it was not repaid to me. Has Jesus not repaid us for what our deeds deserve? Amen. Amen, right? So, God speaks through Christ's sacrifice. God speaks through dreams. God speaks through physical illnesses and whatnot. God speaks through what Christ did on the cross to us, for us. To us, for us, he won us, right? Verse 29, behold, God does all these things twice, 3 times with a man. That is, God continually speaking to us, but we're not listening, right? To bring back his soul from the pit, that he may be lighted with the light of life. Is God speaking to us, trying to call us back from the pit of death so that we can live?
Yes.
Absolutely, and I'm reminded that the Lord is willing that what?
None should perish.
That none should perish. He's doing all he can, bend over backwards to try to save us. So what we find is the entire chapter of 33, Elihu is telling Job, God is speaking, you just don't know what he's saying. The fact that Job gets sick was God making a statement. When Job got sick, was God making a statement? When Job's family and everything was taken from him, was God making a statement?
Yes.
Job just didn't understand what the statement was. This is why it talks about, God speaks through dreams, but we struggle to perceive. Do you think it was a struggle for Job to perceive? You know what's interesting? The stuff that happened to Job was God saying, here is a guy who's righteous and will not betray me, even if you take the hedge away. Who wants God to say that about them? Raise your hand. Who likes the way God said it about Job? See what I mean? It's one of those, I never want to put my... But I'll tell you, if God took everything away just to show that we would be faithful, is God speaking?
Yeah.
Would we struggle to hear?
Yes.
Guess what Job is doing? It's not that Job spends the entire thing saying, I wish I could talk to God and he would respond to me, but he doesn't respond to me. Elihu says, he has responded to you. He speaks, but you don't know what he's saying.
Or maybe Job's not listening.
That wouldn't happen with us, right?
Oh,
We wouldn't go through trial but just not listen to what God is trying to tell us. We wouldn't have physical illness and not listen.
oh, yeah.
We wouldn't have a weird dream and not be able to perceive it. I think that sounds a lot like us. Right? So, chapter 34. Let me see what the time
Before we go to 34,
is. Okay?
who did you put in in question number 2 that is in the wrong?
Job.
Job is in the wrong?
Job is in the wrong, yeah.
Even though he rolls it back and...
Still in the wrong.
Okay.
You shouldn't paint God as though he's against you. He's just not.
No.
And even though Job would roll those things back and say, I need to back off, God was not against him. I mean, it just is what it is. You can take to the bank some paradigms to live life by, and one of the paradigms that you can live life by is God is not against you. God is absolutely for you, but you need to be for God.
Sometimes we get in life's positions and we have to remember that we make choices.
Right.
And the consequences of those choices are what we have to do.
Right.
But if we believe in God, we come out of it. I was homeless for a long time, and I went to get away from my oldest daughter, and she beat me. And every day, I was out there, I prayed every day. I knew I wasn't going to stay there. I knew that I was a strong enough person, believed strong enough in God, that I would become full again. My dad.
Amen.
But I didn't do it by myself.
And did you recognize that the difficulties you're going through is God
Yes,
trying to guide you to something, trying to teach you?
I did.
Absolutely.
Because I've been beaten down so far. I knew that anything was up.
Amen.
And I was there.
We need to remember that God is in control.
Oh, yeah. He had the whole plan going.
Absolutely. And guess where chapter 34 starts going towards? God is in control. Let's check this out. Chapter 34, beginning in verse 5. Beginning in verse 5. For Job said, and this is, by the way, this is Elihu's statement, this is Elihu's summation of the argument of Job and the argument of the friends. And essentially what he's saying is, this is the accusation of the friends that has merit. He's not going down the entire accusation, but the parts that do have merit, Elihu is pointing out, these are the parts that actually have merit. For Job has said, I am in the right. God has taken away my right. In spite of my right, I'm counted a liar. When you make a statement like that, what are you accusing God of being? Unfair or unjust, right? Yeah. My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. What man is like Job? Now, I want you to notice this because Elihu does an ingenious thing here. Job is going to use, Elihu's going to use this one statement to condemn Job and the three friends. So who are Job's friends? These three guys that have been a nuisance to him the whole way through the book. Watch what Elihu says. He points out Job's side where Job thinks, I'm right and I'm not being treated fairly. Look at verse 7 then. What man is like Job, who drinks up scoffing like water, that is, he's just going and putting up with the trash you're talking, who travels in company with evildoers? Who's the company of Job? These three friends. And they accused him the three friends accused Job of having evil friends. And Elihu points out, yep, that's right? Who travels in company with evildoers and walks with wicked men, for he has said, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God. So Job's argument is, I've been good, but it does me no good. And the friends are, you have wicked friends. And they didn't even realize they were accusing him that. They were condemning themselves. And Elihu points that out. So, verse 10, therefore hear me, men of understanding, far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong. For according to the work of man he repays him, and according to his ways he will make it befall him. Of a truth, God will not do wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. What is Elihu's accusation of God? His accusation of God is God does what is right, or just, or good, or however you want to fill that in. Yeah. God does what is right. Verse 13. Who gave him charge over the earth? And who laid on him the whole world? If he should set in his heart, you want to talk about a creepy verse, here's a creepy verse, and it's true. If he, that is God, if God should set in his heart to gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to dust. this is an interesting thing, because what he has just said too, Elu has just pointed out a theological mountain of stuff right here. What he said is that the Spirit of God is in how many people?
All of us.
Everyone. You want to know why you should inherently treat human life with dignity? It's the Spirit of God in everyone. You want to know why you should not participate in abortion or encourage or indulge abortion? The Spirit of God is in everyone. You want to know why you shouldn't treat somebody poorly because they're black or white or Mexican or Japanese? Because the Spirit of God is in everyone. You want to know why you should love your enemies? Because the Spirit of God is in everyone. And if God were to just one day say, you know what, I'm done. Spirit, come back to me. If He were to call His Spirit back to Himself, our bodies would drop to the floor across the universe in an instant. And I say across the universe because you couldn't be in outer space working on a space shuttle and escape it. If God called His Spirit back to Himself, every corpse would fall. So when you attack another person, guess who you're attacking? See what a wild statement this is? This is a milestone of theology. Right? So, I don't even know what the blank is for that one. What's the blank in that one? Yeah, everyone that is alive has God's Spirit, so treat people with dignity. By the way, too, you go to old folks' home, and this is the problem with communism. Hitleristic nonsense said, oh, that person's old, they can't contribute to society anymore. What shall we do? Kill them. Stop it. The dignity of God is worth whatever resources are occupied for the preservation of the dignity of God. Just because someone gets old or handicapped or crippled, or someone's born with Down syndrome or some other thing, and you say, oh, that person's got some kind of either physical or mental retardation or handicap, that's no reason to treat them poorly. I saw a thing recently where one guy was, I want to say it was like 13 years, he was paralyzed, they thought he was unconscious. And then he just started coming to. 13 years? You think over 13 years there have been people that abused him? Because he couldn't defend himself, couldn't stand up for himself? The Spirit of God is in that guy.